when we look back at the life of Elvis Presley. The king of rock and roll, it's almost impossible to imagine a world where anyone thought he wouldn't become a singer, yet that world existed. And it existed long before the fame, long before the flashing lights, and long before the world realized it had witnessed the birth of a legend. This story begins in a small town in Mississippi, where a quiet, shy boy carried dreams far bigger than anyone around him could imagine. His name Elvis Aaron Presley. And before the world knew him as a superstar, he was simply a kid who loved music more than anything, carrying his guitar like a piece of his soul, wandering through childhood with melodies in his heart that the world had not yet learned to hear. Young Elvis was raised in a humble home, built more from love than from money. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, didn't have much, but they had each other and they had their boy. And that was enough. They encouraged his interest in music, even if they didn't fully understand the depth of his passion. From church choir days to quiet evenings, strumming on the porch, Elvis soaked in every rhythm, every hymn, every note. He wasn't loud, he wasn't confident, he wasn't the hip-shaking showman the world would later fall in love with. He was simply a boy who felt music in his bones, even if nobody else did. But as Elvis grew, so did his desire to share his voice. He brought his guitar to school not to show off, but because it made him feel alive, made him feel like he belonged somewhere, even when he didn't quite fit in with the other kids. He was different, not in an obvious way, but in the way a seed is different from a flower. One just hasn't bloomed yet, and no one knows what it will become. One day at his school in Tupelo, there was a small music presentation. Nothing grand, nothing significant. Just a chance for students to perform something they enjoyed, and Elvis, with his courage trembling yet present, stepped forward with his guitar. He sang with all the heart he had, soft at first, then stronger, then with more belief as the song carried him. But when he finished, the room didn't interrupt in applause. There were no cheers. There were only a few scattered claps and quiet whispers from young minds who didn't understand what they had just heard. Whispers from people who couldn't yet recognize greatness, even when it stood in front of them. After the performance, Elvis walked backstage, still holding his guitar, feeling a mixture of pride and confusion. He had done something brave, something that took everything inside him, and he felt good about it. But that feeling faded when his teacher approached him. She wasn't harsh, she wasn't cruel. But sometimes the most painful words are the ones spoken casually, without thought, without the understanding of how deeply they might wound someone. And she looked at Elvis and said the words that would forever echo in the story of his life. "Elvis, you'll never be a singer." Those words hit him harder than he showed. They sank into his heart like stones, weighing him down, pulling him into silence. He didn't argue. He didn't talk back. He simply lowered his head, nodded politely, and walked away, a boy carrying a heartbreak too heavy for his age. The teacher didn't mean to crush a dream, but that's the thing about dreams. They're fragile in the beginning, and it only takes one careless moment to shatter them, or at least attempt to. Elvis went home that day, feeling smaller than he ever had. He placed his guitar down gently, as if it had done something wrong, as if it was the reason someone told him he wasn't good enough. But the truth was, deep down, Elvis knew he loved music too much to let it go, even if someone told him he'd never make it, even if someone couldn't see what he saw within himself. That night he didn't sleep much. He replayed the moment again and again, hearing those words echo in his mind, each time hurting a little more, each time lighting a spark he didn't yet understand. Because even though those words hurt, they did something else too, something the teacher didn't expect. They challenged him, they pushed him. They ignited something inside him that whispered quietly, "Try anyway." And that whisper would become the beginning of a fire that no one could put out. As Elvis entered his teenage years, he kept singing, kept practicing, kept clinging to the music that made him feel alive. He wasn't polished, he wasn't refined, but he had heart, he had soul, and he had something rare, something authentic, something that couldn't be taught in any classroom. He began exploring new styles, absorbing the gospel from church, the blues from Beale Street, the country tunes from the radio, all swirling inside him, creating a sound no one else had. At school, he still felt like an outsider. He dressed differently, slicked his hair differently, and carried himself with a quiet uniqueness that made others whisper, but he kept going. He kept playing, he kept singing, because somewhere deep inside, Elvis knew music was more than just a hobby. It was a lifeline, a calling, a destiny quietly waiting to be fulfilled. Time passed, and Elvis's family eventually moved to Memphis, a city alive with musical influence, a place where sound seeped through the streets. Like electricity, Memphis was unlike anything Elvis had ever experienced. And although he didn't know it then, this move would change everything. He took odd jobs. He struggled financially, but he never stopped singing, never stopped dreaming even when things felt uncertain. One day, while working as a truck driver, Elvis heard about a small recording studio, Sun Records, run by a man named Sam Phillips. Sam was searching for something new, something fresh, a sound different from the polished voices of the time. He believed the next breakthrough would come from someone unexpected, someone raw, someone real. And at that time, Elvis was as unexpected as it got. Elvis walked into Sun Records not as a superstar, not as a confident performer, but as a nervous young man with trembling hands and a quiet hope. He paid a small fee to record a song, as a gift for his mother, not knowing that this simple act would open the door to destiny. When Sam Phillips heard Elvis's voice, he wasn't impressed at first. Elvis sounded unsure, almost hesitant. But there was something in his tone, something in his expression, something he couldn't ignore. Sam sensed potential, not polished talent, but potential waiting to be shaped, waiting to be unleashed after a few more attempts. A magic moment finally happened. Elvis began playing around with a song, loosening up, letting go of his nerves. And suddenly he transformed. He began to sing with a playful rhythm, a raw energy and a spark that lit up the room. Sam Phillips's eyes widened. He leaned closer, and in that instant, he knew he had just discovered something the world had never heard before, something that would change music forever. Elvis didn't know it yet, but his life had just shifted. The wheel of fate had begun to turn in his favor, and soon, the boy who had once been told he'd never be a singer was about to prove that teacher wrong in the most spectacular way imaginable. As Elvis continued recording, his confidence grew, his voice strengthened. His style evolved, and before long, the radio began playing his songs. The first time Elvis heard himself on the airwaves, he froze, hardly believing it was real. He listened to his own voice, pouring through the speakers. The same someone once told him would never amount to anything, and he smiled a quiet, humble smile that carried years of doubt, years of dreaming, and years of determination. Soon Elvis started performing live. Small crowds at first, then bigger and bigger, until the world began to take notice. His style was wild, electric, unpredictable. He moved with freedom, danced with passion, and sang with a raw authenticity that made audiences scream. Not just cheer, but scream. Something no one had ever seen before. Girls fainted. Boys tried to imitate him. Parents were shocked. Critics were baffled. But the world was undeniably captivated. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a phenomenon, a force, a revolution wrapped in rhythm and rebellion. And the moment people saw him step onto a stage, they knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something unforgettable, something that would define an era. And somewhere far away from the roar of the crowd, from the flashing cameras, from the endless sea of fans, was a school teacher who once looked at a shy boy with a guitar and told him he'd never be a singer. She couldn't have known, she couldn't have predicted it. But her words had done the opposite of what she intended. Instead of stopping him, they fueled him. Instead of breaking him, they built him. And instead of silencing him, they pushed him to sing louder than anyone in history ever had. Elvis didn't become great because he wanted to prove her wrong. He became great because something inside him refused to give up. Something inside him refused to stay quiet. Something inside him knew he had a purpose bigger than the doubt of others. Because no one else gets to decide the size of your dreams. Not a teacher, not a critic. Not a stranger, only you. As the years passed, Elvis continued to rise, conquering film, television, concerts, and hearts around the world. He broke records, shattered expectations, and created a legacy that still echoes. Through generations, his voice, his style, his influence, everything about him became iconic, unforgettable, timeless. And with every song he sang, every performance he gave, Elvis was rewriting the story that began in that small classroom, turning a discouraging moment into a legend that would inspire millions. Because that's the thing about greatness. It often starts quietly. It often starts in small towns, in small rooms, in small hearts filled with big dreams. And sometimes greatness is recognized last of all, by the people closest to it, the ones who see only a boy with a guitar, not realizing that boy was born to become a king. Elvis Presley's journey is more than music, more than fame, more than history. It's a reminder that no one has the authority to tell you what you can or cannot become. No one has the power to measure your potential. And sometimes the very words meant to stop you are the ones that help you soar the highest. Elvis turned doubt into determination, criticism into confidence, and a single discouraging sentence into a destiny the world will never forget. And so the shy boy who stood in front of his classmates, clutching a guitar, hearing the words, "You'll never be a singer," became the most celebrated, influential, unforgettable artist of his time. He became Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the legend who shocked the world, the man whose music still lives, still moves, still inspires, reminding every dreamer that even when the world doubts you, even when someone tells you you won't make it, you listen to the voice inside you, the one that whispers, "Keep going." Because the world may not see it yet, but greatness is already growing within you. And that is the true story of the boy who became a king. Not because the world believed in him, but because he believed in himself. And because he dared to sing anyway,